It always does the weird start on live videos on Facebook where it starts before it actually says it started. But I think we're on Facebook now, so we can go ahead and kick it off.
I see a live symbol in the upper right-hand corner. So
all right, so we're somewhere on the internet, so that's really all that matters. We're somewhere.
There you go.
All right. So tonight on the podcast, we are excited to be joined by David Alvarado. Something off.
Sorry.
So David is an award-winning documentary filmmaker with a passion for science. Hey, dude, I'm just going. I'm going. We're going. And so I'm going to just start again. So David Alvarado is an award-winning documentary filmmaker with a passion for science, philosophy, and human rights. He earned his BA in film production from the University of North Texas. He worked producing and shooting documentaries, and later earned his M.F.A. from Stanford University's documentary film and video production program. And then he moved to New York, founded Structure Films, and he is here with us today to talk about Bill Nye film. So welcome, David.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, before we get into Bill Nye and that film, can we talk a little bit about, you?
Sure.
How did you get here and decide that you wanted to be a filmmaker?
Yeah, well, I guess I grew up in Dallas, Texas. It kind of starts there. Dallas is it's a very conservative part of the country, and I was born and raised in one of those creationist-style Christian homes that are basically telling us that the Earth is something like 6,000 years old, that Noah's Ark was a very literal event that happened somewhat recently. And if you see the film, this is one guy named Ken Ham who's in the movie, and he actually goes further than that and says that not only was the Ark real, but it was they had dinosaurs on the Ark, and so that he's one of these types that think that dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time, and some of the dinosaurs would get on this boat, and so that's kind of the world that I came from. But on my local PBS station, here was this guy, Bill Nye, the science guy, who was talking about science and reason and, learning how to question claims and get excited about that. And he and the producers of that show found a way to make it funny and relatable and interesting. And I was always excited every Saturday morning to see a new episode of Bill Nye, the Science Guy, but also Beakman's World. And so I think looking back at it, now as an adult and somebody who focuses specifically on science documentaries, I think that was a big part of sort of what got me interested in this world of thinking about the laws of nature and trying to understand the world around us and find a way to make civilization move forward with those laws. And so that those two things, sort of like the power of telling stories and visual mediums and the amazing reality of science, I think, is what it both came from Bill and somehow it came back to Bill when we did this documentary about him.
So that's really interesting that you grew up in sort of Ken Ham creationist style worldview, because I mean Ken Ham is, well, he's definitely listened to our show before. He is a fan of our show.
That's good.
He dedicated a not insignificant portion of a staff meeting a few months ago to talking about when we had Andrew Seidel on the show to talk about him. So that was
That's
it was
great. So do your viewers know who he is? So that then, like, if you guys covered him on your show?
Oh, we've covered him
more than a few times. I was down there the opening weekend when you guys were shooting.
Did you see us
at the opening? No, I went on the day before. I think it was the Friday. It opened on a Friday, I think, whatever day it opened. I was there. I know. Yeah, you're right. And I think you guys went there the next day or something, something like that. The day that I wasn't there, unfortunately, because
But yeah, our listeners are very familiar with Ken Ham, and the intro to our show is actually Ken Ham talking about us as a couple of atheists who do a podcast. So we have nice audio of him talking about us. But yeah, so in the film, you went with Bill to and the Creation Museum that you
it was
visited?
all in the same week. We the Creation Museum is a separate institution, as you guys know. It's like this thing that shows us why evolution isn't true, and then the Noah's Ark is it covers some of that, but it's also mostly just about why Noah's Ark is true, which is funny. And evolution being one of the bodies of theory in science that has the most evidence for it, somewhere up close to gravity, and then Noah's Ark, something that has just like the least amount of evidence. I mean, there's a lot of things in the Bible that could be true, certain battles or certain kings, like kings that were mentioned in the Bible that we know, can be historically proven to be there. And it's just so funny that he's obsessed with disproving the most solid thing and proving the most weak thing about the Bible. It's I don't know. It's shocking. It's a bizarro world, really.
Well,
it's a lot to take in.
And I mean, just from seeing or hearing from Dan after he actually went and experienced it, and then watching in the film, I mean, the thing that strikes me is that people that go there, they believe that they're essentially seeing something that's historically accurate, right? So how does it feel watching people experience the Ark as if it is real? Well,
for me personally, if that's what you mean, it's like two separate feelings, at the same time. One is, it's kind of funny, I have to admit, it's these are adults. I mean, if somebody built a museum for Santa Claus, not that God is Santa Claus. Like I think people can have their own beliefs in God, and I would never try to make fun of that. But I do think that if you build a giant life-size boat and say this scientifically happened very recently, that is as if an adult believed in Santa Claus. That is so beyond ridiculous that it's worth laughing at. And I think that's worth like registering that feeling. But then there's another level of register, which is that of sort of like extreme concern. I mean, we live in a democracy, and what people believe has a real effect on how people vote, on how people govern, how people think about their neighbors. And if they believe things that are just so absurdly ridiculous as to be dangerous, then that's also should be extremely alarming. And so I think that was sort of the more of what I felt when I was there, was just this like intense concern for where we're going with our country. I mean, we're sort of the laughingstock of a lot of other countries because we have so much power in terms of military and economy, and yet so many of our citizens that are choosing our president and local leadership are basically the equivalent of believing in Santa Claus as adults, and so that's a huge concern.
And then passing that belief on to their kids, who also visit these, these places and are taught, hey, this is what happened. Let's continue this story.
Yeah, that's what really floored me when I was there. Is just all like it was. I don't know what it was like the day after, but opening day, I felt like it was about half of it were full families with kids, and all these kids just being fed because I believe that they believe that most of it's true, but I mean it's demonstrably not true, the overwhelming majority of it. And that, I mean, I couldn't keep my mouth shut. Like I was lucky I had my girlfriend there with me to say, hey, you're talking loud. But I just anyway, we could have we did 2 full episodes on that. We could sit on this all night. I'm sure.
Because
give me a couple of beers and I'll complain for hours if you want.
About Ken Ham.
I think that's what we did.
Yeah.
I think that is what we did. It was a marathon. It was a Ken Hamathon like that summer. And so you have in the film the content having to do with the Ark and Ken Ham and this story that people believe, and and we know it to not be true. Then you have another topic that you would hope at this point most of the people in the world would believe, that man-made climate change is a thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're also tackling the fact that there are people that deny that reality.
Yeah, I mean, it comes from a different place. I mean, with religion, if you think about the sort of the reasoning, how adults get there is they start with an article of faith, and then they work backwards and say, what fits this article of faith? And if your interpretation of the data doesn't fit their interpretation of their faith in their religious books, then there's a conflict, and they'll always choose their faith. with climate change, it's a little bit different. I mean, you know, there's a clear scientific consensus that the greenhouse gas emissions trap outgoing heat from the planet, and that over time slowly changes like all the different knobs in the system, from like how much CO2 is in the ocean versus in the air versus, you know, storm systems versus what the ice is doing, and then the rapid decline of the ice so feeds back into the system that makes it cool or warm faster. And so there's like all these different things, and it's much more complicated, but the consensus is clear that greenhouse gases are indeed trapping outgoing heat overall, and that's causing this rapid change compared to how it's changed in the past. So you have that compared to, I think, what most people who disagree with this, instead of having an article of faith, the closest thing you could identify is they have a political belief, and that tends to be an economic sort of libertarianism, like, which kind of is like an article of faith in a way. I mean, it's all government regulations are bad, you know, corporate gain is good because that makes it so that rich people get richer, and then that makes the economy around them better, which in a way helps even the poor people get you know, they can get jobs if the rich people can give them the jobs. And so there's this sort of like idea that there's this miracle that is the free economy, and that can't be tampered with. If it's tampered with, then all these bad things will happen, and poor people will be poorer, and the rich people won't be rewarded, so they won't try as hard. And so, you know, I can see that worldview a lot clearer than I can see the worldview of there's a God and his son is named Jesus and all this stuff. So it's separate. But even in this worldview of the libertarian or the extreme conservative, like, that should not be able to win over a clear articulation of what the science is actually telling you. And I think that's where that problem is, and that's unique to this argument, is that you know, they choose not to see the data for what it is because they don't want regulations on corporations. I think if you spoke to a climate change denier and pushed them hard enough on the details of what they're saying, it'll always end up there. And that's something I found again and again. It's that it ends up being this political thing. It's not a scientific. And so I think the film explores that in a very subtle way through the characters that we examine. We meet this man named Joe Bastardi, who's he's a brilliant meteorologist. He really understands the weather, but what he doesn't understand or seem to understand is sort of what you hear from mainstream climate scientists who've studied eons of time and know the different greenhouse gas levels of different ages and understood how quickly they changed and why. And they don't seem to understand that much, or Joe doesn't seem to get it at that level. And so, you know, we kind of examine his reasons. And when Bill pushes him hard enough, sure enough, there it is. He just doesn't want regulations. And that's what it was always about in the beginning. So, you know, the film, it's interesting that there's these two, you're right to point this out. There's creationism and there's climate science, and people push against it, although they push against it for different reasons. And it's interesting to watch in the film how Bill sort of leans in on them and what the results are.
And so I guess, like, let's talk a little bit about Bill as the person that you chose to make a documentary about. So how did that come about? Obviously he inspired you as a child, but what was that process of saying, hey, I want to do?
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess the answer is that Beekman wasn't available was the joke answer. We loved Bill growing up. Jason is the other director on this film, and you know, we both watched Bill separately when we were growing up, and Beekman. And I guess when we were done with our last film in 2014, to back up, we made this film about these two scientists who want to reverse the aging process. You guys might have heard of this. It's like, you know, we can all be 25 years old indefinitely. We'd still gain in wisdom and experience, but our bodies wouldn't age. We wouldn't get cancer, heart disease, all this stuff. And so we surveyed these two scientists who were doing this. Aubrey de Grey, who you might have seen around. He has this big, long red beard. And this guy, Bill Andrews, who works with telomeres. So we finished that film in 2014. And it was at that time that Bill had this debate with Ken Ham. Mm-hmm. And at the time, we were of the age group that knew Bill growing up, but then sort of forgot about him for about 10 years. And then suddenly he popped out, I think around the time of Ken Ham. Mm-hmm. And so since we were looking for our next film, we said, well, this is an obvious science film. Who is Bill Nye? Who's the guy behind the bow tie? And so we reached out to him and took a meeting, and he was interested. So it kind of developed from there.
And I really enjoyed watching just Bill Nye, like you said, the guy behind the bow tie, like when he's having conversations about relationships and all of that, and how he doesn't have kids and all. It's like you're getting this sense of this person who has obviously had an impact on a lot of people like our age. I mean, I'm guessing we're maybe similar age, 34.
Well, and even and even my kids who are 6 and 8, like they know who he is, and they sometimes come home and want to watch it on Netflix.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to just see the person behind all of this. And I think with science, sometimes, we want people to have facts and evidence and understand these concepts, but one of the most important things in it is having people out there who can communicate science. And we talked about this a little before we started recording, but you see it sometimes on the internet, people saying, well, Bill doesn't have a PhD, so he's not an authority, or whatever argument people want to make for this kind of thing. But can you talk a little bit about that sort of criticism and why it's either valid or not? Or
yeah, I mean,
just your thoughts.
I think it's a great thing for people to be thinking about. In fact, I'm a huge advocate for media literacy. I mean, I'm obviously an advocate for science literacy, right? So like you should know, the process of science, hypothesis, observation, you should know what a blind test is. You should know how to be able to like watch the news, for example, and know what they're talking about when they say studies suggest. Like, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that science has all come down and said now coffee is good for us, and then 2 years later, all of science agrees that coffee is bad for us? Like, no. You should know what a study is. You should know the basics of what that is, so you can hear it. And obviously, I'm a fan of reading literacy. Everybody should be literate, right? Well, we should also all be media literate. That's another thing that we should focus on. So what is media literate for what we're talking about? Well, you should know when you see a science communicator what that is. When you mentioned, I think you said authority. Well, who is the authority, and what is the authoritative information? You have a guy like Carl Sagan, who's a PhD astrophysicist, right? So he's officially an authority in astrophysics. Like if you have an astrophysics question, he's got a professional voice that his peers in the astrophysics field, some of the best of his time, would be able to like take as a note of authority. But Carl Sagan didn't also just talk about astrophysics, right? He also talked about biology. Well, Carl Sagan would never go to a biology conference and try to become the keynote speaker and try to overturn the ideas of his peers who are way more qualified to speak about evolution. But what he can do is he can quote the authorities of that. He's science literate and a great communicator, so he can read what the best people in biology are saying about evolution and process that and share that with the public. So in that sense, he's not an authority in biology, but he is an authority in communication that can quote the authority in biology. And so the same thing is true, I think, of Bill Nye, who's a mechanical engineer with a bachelor's degree, who is science literate enough to be able to, with his team, and remember, when you have a show like Bill Nye the Science Guy, you have a giant team, and a part of that team is the research team. So people are researching, making sure they're getting the facts right. They're hiring consultants, professional, authoritative, scientific consultants to make sure that this is right about spiders, is this right about gravity, and so on. And then processing that in a way that kids can digest. So they're quoting authorities when they're having shows, or if Bill's having a talk about climate change. He's not trying to overturn climate change science. He's just trying to crunch it and like communicate in the most simplest form possible to the public. And so he's an authority in communication, but not in climate change science in and of itself. And so I think that's an important distinction for media literate people to understand. Now, when you have somebody like Ken Ham, who says all of evolution is wrong because I think that my Bible tells me that is not an authoritative position. He's going directly against the scientific authority without any data, without any proof, and without any consensus. And so that's something that people should be able to see as simple as they can see a sentence on the page of a book. And I think that we have a real problem with that.
Well, you have people, you have people who just understand the scientific process and understands and are able to recognize trusted voices, just almost, interpreting what's being said and reproducing it, repackaging it in a more, I guess, user-friendly way that is easier to understand or more entertaining, especially in Bill Nye's method of what he did, more entertaining to understand. It's going to get the attention of kids, and just especially kids, just get them excited about science and questioning science, or going home and, like, my kids will tell me about something that they saw. They've been into even like Backyard Scientist on YouTube. They'll see him, like, he made a thermite sword, or, you know, like, this is like a year ago or so, but they're telling me this, they're excited about it. They want to know what's happening. And of course I have like a 10-second window to tell them before the next thing that they get distracted by, but still they're like, they're getting excited, and like you're building that base to later on in life. Yeah,
totally. No, I totally agree.
And I like that you said authority and communication. I think that's a really good concept to remember as we, like, Ken Ham is not an authority in communication.
Right. I mean, he's a minister. I mean, I think he's like, he's the authority in theology for his particular sect of his particular religion. I mean, like, I would never argue with
a subset
Ken.
Of a subset.
Yeah. But I would never argue with Kim, like, no, like, Jesus, the Holy Ghost, and God is a Trinity, but they aren't one. They're three. Like, I'm not gonna like, that's his domain. And the domain of science is totally separate. And that's actually his, if I can say sin, that's his biggest sin, is that he's trying to confuse people that there's a crossover there, and there's not. Like, a theological belief is absolutely, literally supernatural. It's outside the natural world. Science is nothing except for, and all including, of the natural world. And so they are totally separate, and Ken has conflated them for his own theological reasons. And so it's really frustrating to hear him talk. And, I spoke to him. It's frustrating.
I can't even imagine having a conversation about some of that with him, because he is somebody who clearly is not open to changing his mind, even when presented with insurmountable evidence against what he believes. And I think that's another difference. We're comparing and contrasting him with Bill. Bill Nye is somebody who kind of famously changed his position on something like GMOs because of evidence. And so, I mean, I think that kind of presents him as human who also understands science.
I totally agree. And I think that when we're talking about the authority of communicators or authority of media, representatives, I think that's a point in your favor if you can list things that you have changed your mind, or you've changed your mind about. Because I've seen Bill change his mind, I guess, twice in the amount of time that I've known him these last couple of years. I mean, one was about GMO. He used to be, overly cautious about GMO, and it's not bad to be overly cautious, but, like, he was doing it to the point where scientists were just having to call him up and say, dude, like, you're clearly not, you don't have a good enough grip on this, because you're saying things that have just already been, like, it's already been proven that it's okay. And then the other thing is, he had this whole, he was attacked recently because he said that philosophy was a useless venture. He's basically like, yeah, you can do philosophy if you want, but you'll have trouble getting a job, and it doesn't tell us anything about the world. And so a lot of people in the philosophy field came out and said, I don't know, dude, like, reason, logic, I mean, these are all fields that are constantly moving forward. I mean, they're not trying to do the same thing as science. It's its own separate field, but it's not a throwaway venture. And so I saw him, like, sort of scratch his head and grumble, like, what are they talking about? Oh, philosophy. Oh, I don't know. And then slowly but surely, I saw the wheels turn, and over the course of that year, one of those years, he was like, okay, I get it. Philosophy actually can help us even identify problems that we're doing in science. I mean, it's my personal belief, this is David speaking here, that we should have philosophers inside laboratories. It'd be cool to have them, like, double check the reasoning behind the test that you're doing. Have like somebody who's a professional logician look at what you're looking for. The process of elimination is a part of science, and that's actually what philosophers are good at. And so, I think that there's some room for that. And I think Bill changing his mind, I think that's a feather in your cap, because nobody gets everything right. And so those of us that can say these are the things that I've gotten wrong, I think are more reliable sources.
Yeah. And so I think clearly you chose a subject for your film he's relatable. He's somebody that is familiar, but this kind of takes it to the next level of familiarity. with them. So it's so I think it, yeah, I mean, obviously I watched the film, I told you I liked it, and I genuinely like thought it was a nice portrait of somebody who, you know, we kind of grew up with and stuff, and I think can just contribute to, you know, kind of the narrative around some of these like issues of science and critical thinking, where, you know, we're kind of in a weird era, this post-truth, alternative facts, like all of this stuff. And I think anyone who's making content that's science-based needs to contribute somehow to helping.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think it seems like, I'm not the only one saying this, but it seems like it's a problem of technology. It's obviously partially a problem of technology. You know, Facebook is feeding people ideas that they want to believe, and on both sides. Like I know that like my parents' conservative Facebook feed is just so different from my liberal Facebook feed. And even though I want to believe that my side is more correct, closer to truth, I know that there's distortions in there. And, you know, it's frustrating to be caught in this web that Mark Zuckerberg made for us and other people like him. And so there is something we can each do. I'm just not sure what it is yet. You know, it probably has something to do with, you know, reading outside of what we're comfortable with. I mean, we should be reading the Wall Street Journal in addition to the New York Times. We should be reading The Economist, because there's great publications that are center and even right of center that I think are worth examining that perspective. I mean, we should stay away from the margins and we should all come into the center and go on both sides.
Oh, look out.
I know that's a revolutionary idea. That imagine if we all adopted that.
We're gonna get some hate mail for that now.
Oh, great. Yeah. Okay. Never mind. Just watch Amy Goodman.
No,
just do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
You said that to two people that agree with you.
Okay,
So here's the little in the center echo chamber here. But you're right though, because people do sort of, because it's comfortable to look at your news feed and think, oh, all these people agree with me. They, you know.
I thought I was right about that, and now I know I'm right about that.
Right. Let's confirm that and feel really good for a minute. But then, you know, a year ago, Donald Trump got elected. So clearly we weren't all right. So there's something that is not right out there.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So I guess we can all like sit on the idea of like, what do we do to make it better? But I think as much as, I mean, you've made a film.
Yeah, we made a film. You know, and you know, we actually, I'm an atheist, and we included voices of Christians, very legitimate scientists. So Francis Collins is the current director of the National Institutes of Health. He's basically America's scientist, and he was the director of the Human Genome Project, one of the biggest projects that happened back in the 90s for science. And he's a Bible-believing Christian. He believes in all that stuff. And yet he can get on there and say, you know what, even though I believe in God and Jesus, all that stuff, I obviously evolution happened, Mr. Ham. You know, like to have that voice in there, I think we're trying to get that, to explain that we're not attacking anybody's religion. We're just trying to show you that science seems to be totally on board with this idea that we evolved from other types of animals, and that we're all in this web of biology, and that's just as clear as gravity. And the same thing for climate change. Our main climate scientist, Jim White, is this amazing, super articulate, super nice scientist who works in Greenland, and he's like, look, you know, belief is not a way that you look at climate change. You don't choose to believe in climate change. It's physics. You know, belief is about God or no God. That's a belief. That's a choice that you have to make, you know, and climate change is just physics, and we just know how greenhouse gases works. It's that simple. And so, you know, to have those voices in there is our attempt to sort of try to reach across and differentiate what the conversation is really about, and be inclusive. We want to include more people, not just push them away and say that they're wrong.
Yeah, because I mean, it's that idea that science doesn't actually care what you believe. Because
it's not a belief system,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so it was noticeable, obviously, in the film that you had people that were believers, but a lot of these issues, it is about reaching across tribes of people, because we're not just in our little atheist echo chamber.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
it's
you know,
there are truths that are universal.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, atheist echo chambers. I'm not really a part of like any atheist organization. Should I
Oh my
be?
God,
I'm
no.
always, yeah, I don't.
Hard pass. Just stay away.
That's
like,
what I was gonna say because I've gone through a few of these things and they're just
please
like,
don't.
I don't know. Do you not believe in God? Yeah, I don't believe in God. You believe in? I don't believe in God. It's like there's no. I'm sort of with Sam Harris on this. I don't agree with everything he says, but he's sort of just like, why are we getting together as atheists? Like, you know.
Yeah, we all answered the easiest question. Right. We don't have like that doesn't mean that we all need to be buddies and have everything in common.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with it not be buddies, but I think there is some value to just having some kind of sense of community. I don't think there's I think it's incredibly toxic when you lump all these people who have all these different views on things together and say, well, we're all atheists, we're part of the atheist movement, and now we're all going to be friends and hold hands and all get along. And then because that's how you breed resentment towards people, and that's how you get just a lot of things that we've talked about previously on the show that we don't have time to talk about tonight.
Yeah, sure.
But
I mean, I think the common cause, like when you want to think about like moving things forward away from religious oppression, like we can all come together. I think you should make an organization where like a Muslim, a Christian, and an atheist can all join together and say, we promote the ideals of secularism in the government. None of us want to be oppressed by our government at any time. So we're going to collectively come together and fight for a more secular government. You know, that to me makes sense.
That is Americans United for the separation of church and state. I think
right,
that is
exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I would go to one of those meetings, but I'm not sure about like an atheist meeting.
I mean, we've been to two, or have we been to two together, Natalie?
No,
I've been to two.
You went to one without me.
You didn't go to the conference that shall not be named.
I did not. But
I said not be named. Yeah, I mean, I've gone to two. This year was my first year to go to any, and they were both. I enjoyed both of them, and the meeting people that I had previously only seen names of online and things like that. I enjoyed that, but I mean, I decided to go to other.
Yeah. I think I'm more into, as far as kind of community goes, the science and skeptic community is a little bit more my vibe.
Yeah.
Just personal preference.
Yeah,
but
that makes sense. There's no big
yeah, that's it. So that's more my thing.
You know what? I take it back. We're talking to the American Atheist Society, I think is what they're called, and we want to show the movie. We're going to show the Bill Nye movie there, perhaps in Oklahoma City at the big annual thing. So if I'm invited,
after you just shit
I'll totally
invite this guy. I was actually thinking of going to that one.
Okay, but well, I'll see you there.
All right, so we're
right
going.
We're like, we're never going to the meeting.
We're never going to
the meeting.
We're going. David Silverman, we're coming to Oklahoma City.
We're coming.
All right, so just a few questions now that we've talked a lot about Bill Nye. I'm curious, do you have a person or a topic who would be your dream documentary subject?
Yes, and the answer is that our next film is actually about this guy. So Jason Sussberg, my beloved partner, film partner, and co-director, he and I, we work together remotely. He lives in San Francisco. I live here in New York, and we did The Immortalist together, and then we did this film together, and now we're about to do another film. And he's been trying to get this guy to do a film for almost a decade now, and he's never let anybody tell the story about his life before. So it's for some reason it's been really hard to get, but he recently agreed. And his name is Stuart Brand. Do you guys know this character?
I don't. So okay. Now I'm really interested.
Most people don't. I mean, if you were a part of the intersection of the counterculture in the 1960s and technology, then Stuart Brand was sort of one of the prophets of that community. So who's the counterculture and who's and the cyberculture? Well, that's essentially Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos. Bill Gates was a little bit too much of a nerd to be in this. Bill Gates wasn't doing acid and thinking about computers, so he was outside of this. But that whole surge of people from Silicon Valley looked up to this guy named Stuart Brand. He's sort of one of the early founders of the modern environmentalism movement. He's the guy that convinced NASA to release images of the Earth. So NASA took all these photos of the Earth, and that first iconic image of the Earth partially came out of Stewart's efforts to get us to think about the whole Earth as a system, and why haven't we seen the whole Earth yet? And he created this thing called the Whole Earth Catalog after that, where if you guys have hippie parents, they definitely had a copy. For people moving back to land, the Back to Land movement, you needed solar panels, and you needed sewage systems, and you needed a hammer. Well, they didn't have Amazon.com. They had this thing called the Whole Earth Catalog, which essentially was the Amazon of the time, and you can find anything you want in this one centralized place. You could find computer parts. Steve Jobs could order computer parts as he was putting his first Macs together. And so, he's sort of this inspiration for this whole world of the cyber culture from that era. And so today, he continues his sort of pushing the boundaries and bringing people together for crazy ideas. And his effort today is to do this effort, de-extinction, which is essentially conservation 2.0. If you think about, it's basically Jurassic Park technology for rescuing recently extinct species. So in Jurassic Park, you had the whole, we're gonna get a T-Rex and like make it kill a bunch of people, right? Well, this is more like human beings killed off the Tasmanian tiger, the dodo bird, almost killed off the California condor until we intervened, and most likely killed off the woolly mammoth, hunted to extinction. As well as other, probably a quarter of the large mammals here in North America were made extinct by humans. And so all these animals that were lost to overhunting from 10,000 years ago could be rescued. In theory, you could take some samples of the Tasmanian tiger that we have. You can find a closely related marsupial and combine the DNA, just like you remember from the Jurassic Park animation on the ride, and
Dino DNA.
Dino DNA is the frog. Instead of a dinosaur and a frog, it's just a Tasmanian tiger and I don't know, a dingo, right?
Yeah.
And so you combine that, and then you have another animal closely related, give birth to it, and then you just start to like breed it and then release it to the wild, and then suddenly that region has Tasmanian tigers again. And then so. It's possible. There's no reason to think that we can't do it. But should we do it? Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, one argument is that we shouldn't, because we've already messed things up enough. Why mess things up further? Like it's like that episode of The Simpsons where the toads are eaten by the snakes, and then the snakes are eaten by the donkeys, and then the gorillas, and then the gorillas have to freeze over the summer or over the winter. And So in one sense you can say that's true, but then also what's the difference between what we did with the California condor, right? We were down to just a handful of them, and through a lot of manipulation, we repopulated and reintroduced them to the wild. Well, what would be the difference if somebody came along with a shotgun, blew off the heads of the last two and said, oops, I shouldn't have done that, and then we saved them, and then it reintroduced them to the wild, through this process of de-extinction. It's a little crass, but it's also sort of the same thing. There's nothing about that moment in time that they actually died. What Stewart says is if we could reach through the membrane of time and rescue these creatures that are still fit for this environment. I mean, remember, 5,000 years, 100 years is nothing in evolutionary scales. If you were to put the Tasmanian tigers into the wild now, the only difference is that there'd be laws that would not let people hunt them until they're back at regular population. So there's no difference in the environment. Even the same is true, shockingly enough, for the woolly mammoth. They would still graze on the fields, and actually it would make those fields more natural, because that's for millions of years woolly mammoths were there grazing, and like that kept the ecosystem what it was, and it was in a healthy way. And it was we that came and made it unbalanced and took away the woolly mammoth. So why not introduce the animals that fit so well in the land? There's still a slot for them. And so I think you can argue with that, and there's answers to those arguments, but it's this interesting conversation. Should we, shouldn't we, and why not? And so we've signed with Stewart, and we'll be doing him for the next film.
Awesome. So that will definitely be a conversation starter, clearly.
Sure.
Because that's there's a lot there to unpack, and ethical stuff and all of it. And
yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how to pitch it. Like, I don't know, should I start with De-Extinction? I'll start with De-Extinction.
Go there, and then just and the Jurassic Park connection, all of that. I mean, it's like, I think you've got something right there. Okay, all right, cool. And
I was to say, I know you got me sitting here biting my tongue in the interest of time. So
yeah. So see, like this is a movie that it will be made and people will talk about and want to see. Now, what are a couple of your favorite films ever?
Not also including fiction films.
Yeah, we can include fiction. Yeah.
I love Modern Times. Have you seen that movie, the Charlie Chaplin one? Charlie Chaplin. It's just like a love story with like the whole sort of the hero tramp guy where he just has trouble and ends up making it through despite all odds. It's not even a talkie, you know, like it has like subtitles or whatever, intro titles.
The cards like between the
yeah, exactly. And yet it makes you laugh, it makes you cry, it makes you think, it makes you want to fall in love with somebody you meet, you know. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of the perfect movie. So I like that one. But, you know, the movie that got me into filmmaking was Punch Drunk Love with Adam Sandler, which you know,
of all people, I know.
You wouldn't think, but, you know, I think Paul Thomas Anderson has such, I mean, everybody knows this. He has such a good talent, a good skill at identifying actors and putting them into roles that really are just like who they are. And so, like, he just really milks Adam Sandler for what he is, you know. He you know, instead of being like this goofy comedian, he's sort of this like sad, you know, masculine character that doesn't know his place and has trouble with, you know, it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of amazing. And so if you haven't seen that, you should check that out.
All right, and now we assume that people are going to want to see your film after watching and listening to this. So where can people find the Bill Nye film?
Right now it's in movie theaters. So if you go to BillNyeFilm.com, you can find a list of movie theaters that it's playing at. I think it's something like 20 or maybe 30 theaters in different cities around the US and Canada. And so you look there first and see if your city is on there, because we'd love to have your support in the theaters. And then it'll be coming next to iTunes and all those kind of like pay to watch platforms. We don't have a date for that yet, but we can tell you that it will be on broadcast in April, sometime around Earth Day. So like, I think April 17th, like that Wednesday or something. It'll be a broadcast all over the US and Canada on PBS, on the program called POV. And then after that, it'll be on Netflix indefinitely, well, for 5 years worldwide. So even if you're in whatever, France or Australia, you can see it on Netflix after the broadcast on Netflix.
Awesome. Well, and do you have any other social media you would like people to know about, follow you, Structure Films, anything?
Well, I'm at Structure__ films. If you want to follow me, I don't have anything to say, but if you want to follow the film, it's at Bill Nye Film, and I think you'll see a lot of fun things. So,
all right. Well, thank you so much for doing this with us and telling us about your movie and what you're up to. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your interest.
Thank you.
All right. Dan, we'll like stop this. That was good. Thank you.